This is from the penultimate round of the European Individual Championship. And I'm looking at another King's Indian defence. It's a very dangerous opening. But dangerous for whom? So this is the game between Ihor Samunenkov and Vasyl Ivanchuk. Now, both these players are kind of mid-pack. Chucky was doing pretty well, but lost a crucial game. But anyway, I've picked this game out because I thought it was so interesting. So White claims space as usual. And there are many ways of tackling the King's Indian. But Samunenkov goes for h3. Now, this involves expanding on the king side. And it's a system that I've always enjoyed playing as White. Because I never liked as White to sort of suffer in those systems where you charge down the queen side and Black charges down the king side. And it just seemed to me that wasn't much fun for the king on g1. But this system I really like because White gains space on the king side and actually prevents Black from attacking. Now, Black has to basically choose, do you put the pawn on e5 or do you put the pawn on c5? Or do you do something else? You know, something like c6 and a6 and b5. Ivanchuk plays knight a6, which kind of delays the decision. He still might go for c5, but he might go for e5. So g4. So White claims space on the king side. And Ivanchuk decides to play e5. Now, here, of course, White can take, but when there are big holes here, White really has no chance of an advantage, and it can actually lead to positions where White is worse. Because very often one of those knights can spin round into d4 or f4. No, of course, to get the advantage against the King's Indian, you really need to claim space. And this is why I always loved playing against the King's Indian, because you have this wonderful space advantage that makes it difficult for Black to maneuver, but it makes it possible for White to start attacking on the king side. And you can leave the king in the middle, at least for the time being anyway, because the centre is closed. Ivanchuk plays knight c5, attacking the pawn on e4. And actually, this is already quite an important moment in the game where White has to decide how to defend that. A lot of people saying, why not? I'm often asked this question, why not take like this? In fact, I remember in one of the first occasions I played against the King's Indian, where I took like this. And I remember there was a coach who said, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't give up your dark squared bishop. And I didn't understand why. It just seemed pretty natural to just take the pressure off here. But basically it's all those dark squares. That's the problem. That one day this bishop will come in. And also it makes it much more difficult for White to attack on the king side. And, you know, this knight can blockade here. But an important alternative, White played f3 here. An important alternative is queen c2. So that leaves the pawn protecting the bishop, which later on could be important. So there was a recent game, Carlsen against Naroditsky, where Magnus won a beautiful positional game, for example. But so queen c2 is possible. Anyway, that's another story. f3. Supporting this one, supporting that one. a5, a very important move for Black. If Black doesn't play a5, then White will be able to push the knight away with b4. Therefore a5. Secures the knight on excellent post on c5. Queen d2. Yep, claiming this diagonal. That looks very nice. c6. Now it's time to bring some pieces out, particularly that knight on g1. It should really be heading to g3, and then it has interesting options to sacrifice, for example. So knight e2 also supports e4. And Ivanchuk exchanges because, well, he wants to try and create counterplay on the c file, and the bishop will come here, and also b5 as well. So bishop d7 looks at these squares, and knight g3. And a4. So Ivanchuk claims some space, and potentially the queen can come here as well. It comes there in the next move, actually. h4. So white is looking to push one of these pawns. Queen a5. So Ivanchuk building up. Might play b5, b4. Try and get some counterplay. Could be that a3 comes as well. Just depends how white plays this one. Now, Samunenkov decided to play g5 here. H5 feels correct to me in this position. It could be that you push this bishop back to h8. Sometimes you just go for an attack on the h file. Sometimes you might want to throw this in. And that's been seen in a few games. So in any case, well, Samunenkov played g5, which is also very interesting. His knight could go backwards to c7 to support this. But Chucky plays knight h5. So that damages black's king side, obviously. However, it does keep the position kind of stable, you could say, for black on the king side. And, you know, he hasn't had to retreat, so means the rooks are still connected. They can, for example, one can move here. Knight b1. Well, I can understand why white is very keen to exchange queens. A position like this didn't happen. Well, white has this space, and you know this could be quite good. I mean, if I'm going to retreat the knight, I have to say I think I would slightly prefer knight d1. It has more options than b1. It might spin out to f2. It might come back to c3. It's hard to say, but I think I would slightly prefer that one. But anyway, knight b1. But Ivanchuk put the queen back on d8 instead of exchanging queens. Exchanging queens is really what white wants in this position, because you don't have to worry about your king, and I think it's easier to take control of these kind of positions. That feels pretty safe for white. You know, it could be you get in f4. It's still quite a tricky position, actually. Anyway, Ivanchuk certainly doesn't want to exchange queens. Puts the queen back here, and this knight popped out again. f5. So this is a very consequential pawn break. So there's pressure here, so that gets taken, and that opens up the g file. Now, I'm not quite sure why Ivanchuk didn't recapture with the queen, but he had other ideas. Well, I do know, I mean, there are some nice ideas behind rook takes f6. I think the point is that he's looking potentially to play the queen to f8 to support this rook, and also maybe exchange bishops with bishop h6. I think that's his idea. But I find it interesting that, you know, this is also a very reasonable move, queen f6. But Ivanchuk simply doesn't care about bishop g5, which wins the exchange. He's just not bothered. In fact, white played bishop e2 to defend this. And after rook c8, then he played bishop g5. So Ivanchuk just doesn't worry about giving up the exchange. He just played the king away from the open file here. And yeah, I mean, if white doesn't take this, then the queen is going to come to f8 with some potential to sacrifice here, or also bishop h6 exchanging off that bishop. But Samunenkov took. So what exactly has Ivanchuk got for that exchange sacrifice? Well, it's about getting rid of this dark squared bishop, which controls so many important squares here. And if this bishop can reach the diagonal, then that's potentially very nice. White has never castled. The king is in the middle. And now it starts to look a little bit more problematic for the first time in the game. It's probably not going to be safe on the king side. Certainly can't walk into some discovered attack here. And yet in the middle, it's broken the connection between the rooks. So White's coordination is not so good now. But I think that's why he took the exchange. He's hoping to get into an endgame. I mean, this endgame does look favourable for White. This bishop certainly doesn't get in the game. And this has opened up. So Ivanchuk avoids queen exchange, retreats, and knight c4. Okay, the knight doesn't look bad here. So White obviously thought that he'd be doing all right here, but watch what happens. In fact, knight c4 is a mistake. White should have taken here. That bishop looks good, but rook g1 with the idea rook g5 perhaps is still okay for White. In any case, knight c4 played, bishop h6, the queen takes the pawn, and queen f4. Now it's hard to imagine, but White is actually lost in this position. If you look at this with a computer, you'll see the computer needle suddenly goes zoom, twitches in Black's direction. It really is hopeless. It's incredible. I mean, it would be very hard to judge that this position is so good for Black. Now, here, knight takes d6 was played. Let's just have a very quick look at rook g1. How do you deal with that one? I mean, there's a brilliant way to win, actually. Rook g1 looks natural because it covers the g3 square and, you never know, could set up some kind of counterattack here. But Black wins with knight d3 and then rook takes c4. And there is no defense. So, well, if this is taken, check. And that's checkmate. Or if rook g5, queen e3 here. Okay, Black is definitely in here. This is a very nice checkmate, actually. Takes. And queen g1. That wonderful bishop covers d2. So this is the position where White played knight d6. This is the game continuation, just to make it absolutely clear. Knight d3 check. Now, king f1. If, by the way, if this is taken, then this one followed by this one is winning. Okay, so king f1. Right. Over to you. Black to play. There is only one way for Black to win this position. How does Black win? Time for tea. Thank you very much. That's good stuff. Yorkshire tea, you can't beat it. Only one way for Black to win. This is absolutely not obvious. Rook f8. It's a winning move. So what is the big idea? Well, this is one of them. If that knight is taken, then bishop g4 traps White's queen. So if the rook weren't on f8, queen takes g4, would be legal, but in this position, well, it's legal, but just not very advisable. So rook f8 just keeps things going, actually, and there is a threat to play here. Rook d1 played. Knight takes b2. And now white decided to do something about this and played knight f5. But this was taken. Knight takes rook here. So material is now even. I'm not counting the pawns. Check. So material is even, but basically white king is in massive trouble. So for example, if bishop e2, you could do this. Rook g8. And that one wins. So king e1, bishop f4. This one is just stealing into the position. And now queen c1, and that was the final move of the game. White resigned. So why did white resign? Well, that bishop is threatened. If king e2, then that captures the bishop. And apart from that, no really good defense. So queen g4, for example, could take here. Lots of checks. And, well, let's play rook g8 and win the queen. So this game, I think the bishop was the star of this game, actually. That bishop is just an incredible piece. It's that King's Indian bishop, which, you know, around about here, you think, okay, this is a pretty miserable piece. And then it's getting to around about here, and you're thinking, okay, this is why I never really got on with playing the King's Indian. And then round about here, okay, you're still thinking, okay, it's not the best piece in the world. But after queen f8 and bishop h6, so that's a kind of threat to exchange off that bishop. And then once black sacked the exchange, then this turned into the most important piece on the board, conquering this diagonal. I mean, it still looks like taking that exchange was, well, a little bit casual, let's put it like that. And this bishop turns into the best piece on the board. And it's yet another illustration of how the King's Indian can turn on just one move. It might look safe, but suddenly white was lost. So, yeah, coming back here, certainly this looked like a big mistake because this doesn't look so terrifying. But white still has a problem of where to actually place the king. Very, very double-edged opening. So that's brought Ivanchuk up a little bit up the standings, but he's on 6.5 out of 10. So he won't be fighting for first prize. In fact, there are two players sharing the lead going into the last round. So we have Alexei Sarana against Kirill Shevchenko. So they're both on 8 out of 10. So they will play each other in the final round. And then there's a stack of players on 7.5. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens between Sarana and Shevchenko. Sarana playing under the FIDE flag, which means he's Russian. And Kirill Shevchenko, a Ukrainian, but he's now playing under the Romanian flag. It's complicated, folks. Anyway, I shall report back on the final round of the European Individual Championship coming soon. I hope you've enjoyed my coverage. If you have, don't forget to subscribe and do consider supporting us via PayPal or Patreon. Thanks for watching.